I think we are. Right, okay. Hello, this is a video about voice, which happened in Harrow in the time before 2000. I'm going to ask Claudia to start us off by telling us who she is and a little bit about herself. Claudia.
Okay, so my name's Claudia Mernick, and as you said, I was a member of Voice, which started in 1986, and I've got the chronology in front of me. And so at the time it started, I've been living in Harrow since the early 80s. I was a librarian, an information officer before I had children. So I had my first child in 1984 and my second one in October 1986. So I guess at the time that I joined Voice and got to know the other women here, I had one child aged 2 and a bit, pregnant with the next one, and was in between jobs and working freelance, but only part-time. And I think when we go around the room and other people say perhaps where they were at, for some of the others of us in the group, that was a similar situation. We might have been between jobs, freelance, with young children, etc., etc. But this will come out in the discussion. So that's me anyway.
Right, thank you, Claudia. I'm going to ask Patricia again.
Hi, I'm Patricia, or Pat Crevine. I was involved in Voice really from the beginning. I think I was introduced to it via Sue Coomber, who had been with me setting up a group called Babies Against the Bomb and various other things, because we weren't that keen on toddler groups, mother and toddler groups at the time. We found something a bit more interesting to do. And I was married. I'd been living in Harrow since 1980. My daughter was born in 1981. I was working full-time as a social worker at the time in Brent, I think, or it might have moved on to Hillingdon by then, but basically a generic social worker, becoming a children's social worker at that time. And yeah, I think my main interests, other interests at the time, were that I was part of the Labour Party at that particular time, and I think a lot of the things I did in Voice were connected with socialism and Labour Party politics.
Right, okay. And Kay?
Yes, okay, I've unmuted myself. Okay, so I'm Kay Bodylove, and I moved to Harrow in the early 70s actually, but was moving around excuse me, within Harrow, various flats and houses and shared houses and so on. I moved to my current house in 1984. And it's just across the road from that Claudia Mernick who spoke first. And I knew Claudia before that, vaguely, but I got to know her a lot less vaguely around that time. And one of the things that I think brought us together, we were running or involved in things like a Harrow film group and so on and so forth. And also I had my first child when she had her second child, and obviously that becomes a huge bond, and she, you know, has always been and remains a very good friend. The issue with Voice, I think, for me, I was working full-time all the time. Even when my children were little, I was in full-time work, so I wasn't as closely involved in Voice as some of the people in the room. What I did do was I wrote articles for the Voice magazine, which I was actually horrified to that Claudia still has some of these on file because she shares some with me. Oh my God. And they became protest articles. I remember very vividly writing one about wheels after I had my daughter when she was a young baby, and realizing, you know, I couldn't go up and down stairs. I couldn't get into Harrow Station to go anywhere. I couldn't get to the children's wear at Marks and Spencer's because I was on wheels. And it opened up my perceptions to what it was like to be a less abled person in our society. So it became more political from that point of view, but mainly for me through writing for the magazine. When Claudia, who was really operative in getting the internet, along with people like Sue Spilling and Pat and others, getting the International Women's Days off the ground, they were amazing. I'm sure they're going to come up in this discussion. I went to all the ones that were available, and they really changed my life in terms of the people I met and the attitudes that I, you know, came to acquire. And the final thing that I want to say, and again, it refers to Claudia's work, is the women's comedy cabaret, which was, you know, just an absolute breath of fresh air, so amazing. And I just remember going along to the Railway Hotel in Wealdstone, sadly now locked down, and seeing people like Jenny Eclair and Jo Brand, Donna McPhail. They were outstanding comics.
Okay, we'll come to that.
so great. So I'm really here as a spectator because I think I really want to hear what the other women in the room have to say.
Okay, okay, I'm going to go to Lynn next, please.
Yes, I moved to Harrow in 1971. And I had my children in 77 and 79. So at the time of Voice, they would be about 9 and 7. I was working full time, and I'm not quite sure which job I was in, but I think I was working as a welfare rights advisor. And my particular interests were around poverty and benefits. In fact, I think I might have written articles about supplementary benefit. I can't in the Voice magazine. I can't quite remember now. And I don't quite know how I got involved actually, because I knew Kay and Claudia through the film group, because I remember learning how to be a projectionist, which was fun. I think it was through friends really that I got involved in Voice. But I wasn't a founding member. I think I joined in a bit later on.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Okay. And Sue.
Yeah, I moved to Harrow in 1969, and that's when I had my son Duncan. And I guess coming to Voice in 1986, and Duncan by that time was 17, he was about to go off to university. So I'd had my, if you like, my child, I guess, younger. And since about 72, I'd been involved in the women's liberation movement. And I'd been involved in the National Abortion Campaign and lots of different campaigns on the left. So I'd come to Voice with, I guess, you know, having been involved for quite some time. And I was during the 70s, early 80s, working as first in hospital, the Harrow Hospital, Mount Vernon Hospital, and then I went back to health visiting for Brenton Harrow Area Health Authority. But in 1981, I started a degree at Middlesex Poly then. I had finished it about 1985. And joining Voice, I think it was one of the founding members, but this is what I'm not quite sure about. I think, and Pat might remember, it was, there was a meeting held, is it the Trade Union Centre or something? And that's, I think, how we first met. And I think Claudia was there, Pat, can't remember who else. And I think we then decided maybe we'd have this women's magazine. So I think that's my situation.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Okay, so it was primarily a magazine then? Just a magazine? Anybody?
Yeah, it started as a magazine. So the first issue, looking at this chronology I got, came out in February 1986. And then the next one was in April, next one in August, next one in October. But I think, and I was looking through the minutes, unfortunately, I haven't got the number one set of minutes. The minutes that I've got start, I think, for the third issue. But looking at that third issue, because I wanted to see the first one, it's a shame we don't have it. Who were the people there? But by the third issue, we were already talking about having socials and fundraising and it being more of a platform for other things, for campaigning. So it was all, and so it just grew generically. We had a first spare tire benefit soon in that first year, and then we continued. The cabarets were later, I'll talk about them in a minute, but right from the word go, it wasn't just to be a magazine per se. Does anybody else have any views on that or remember?
Yeah, I think really there was a bunch of women who were involved in all different things. It was a variety of things, so it kind of drew women together, some of which were more interested in art or poetry, others harder sort of political issues, and all those activities we were doing around Voice were reflected in the magazine later, or
Yeah.
at the time we reflected all the different things the group were involved in.
Right. Okay.
Sorry, Marilyn, can I just say, so because I've got all the records here,
Okay.
I hope I'm not going to be too much of a pain quoting sources all the time, but I thought this was very interesting. This was, we had a workshop in May 1987, so we'd been going a year. As I said, we started in 86, and we called it, I love the old-fashioned language, but with a voice. And Lynn and Anne Joseph facilitated it, and it said, at the Voice meeting of 14th of March, we decided to have a workshop on the 9th of May to review the aim and direction of the group and the magazine. So I suppose it reflects that we were all women that had degrees and, had middle class, some of us more high-powered jobs than others, but all, really well educated. We all reflected in the kind of activities and the way we thought about what we were doing. So Anne and Lynn agreed to plan a structure for the day, and so these were the topics. Sorry, I'm near the camera.
Right.
So it was aim of Voice was one of the workshop topics, i.e., is it about campaigning, producing a newsletter, or both? Who is the newsletter for and who can contribute to it? What is the editorial policy to be? If we are going to campaign, which campaigns do we get involved in and why? Then another one was decision making, which was it's great. That's what the women's movement was about, wasn't it? Reflecting not just on what you did, but the politics of how you operated. So decision making, how do we make decisions? Does it depend on the personalities present? How do we deal with conflict? Is consensus necessary? Then there was support. Well, how do we effectively support each other? Responsibility, what to expect from each other. Openness, how do we welcome new women to the group? Politics, how political is the group? Does this matter? And then whether we continue with the publishers we were using, Hills Press. And so I think that's interesting to record. It just gives a flavour of how we were already really reflective about how we operated. Anyway, over to you.
Well, that's really interesting, but what I want to know is the answers to those questions. So who can tell me? Sue?
No, I just want to add to Claudie, I think that also when I don't know, you said something about somebody else printed Voice, but first of all, we did it ourselves, didn't we? On a Xerox. We had no computer or anything. And there's a lot of typing up and a lot of cut and paste.
Yes.
And the skills putting something like that together. And sadly, Alison Williams is she's still alive, but not in a position to really be here. Because I remember, she had a lot of those skills. And I think that's something that was really interesting,
Yes.
Actually producing it, physically producing it.
Right. So when it was first produced, then it was what? Just A4 sheets, was it?
No, it was as Sue said. I didn't get involved because my art and design skills are zilch. But as Sue said, there were some really talented and competent and committed women. It was cut and paste. It was typed up or drawing sourced, and then layout. There were layout meetings. If you look at the minutes, it says, please come to the layout meeting at Nibswaite Road. Sue Comer was very involved, or Sue Spilling, or Alison. And due to their kind of eye for looking at things, it was absolutely lovely, because it was then taken as the cut and paste original to be printed off by this Hillview Press. But unfortunately, Hillview Press was quite expensive, because it does look lovely, this. And so sort of towards the end, when I think 1988, 89, we reluctantly had to go for a cheaper process, and it was Xeroxed off. But they were beautifully and professionally done, as Sue said, all credit to them.
Yes, okay, so that's when it started in 1986 and 1987. Right, and how long did it carry on for?
It finished in 1989, so it's a very brief, the whole kind of voice thing, which I think coincides with those dates, was very kind of brief but intense flowering of quite feverish activity from, 86 to 89, when people either moved or went off to different things or got more
did the social and political factors and environmental factors that affect whether you carried on or not? Did that change?
I suspect. I don't have clear memory. And it's interesting you said about facilitating that meeting, because I've forgotten all about that.
I remember it well.
I do have a vague memory of it now. I suspect that it required more time commitment than we were actually able to give. And we had a lot of initial success that sort of petered out. So I think it was difficult to keep that kind of momentum at that level over a sustained period of time.
Yes, because most of you had got young children and jobs, and there's not a lot of spare time in that, is there? So I think you did well to keep it going for those few years. And now I want to find out about the things that you organised. Campaigns. What sort of campaigns were there, and who got involved in what? Sue, what did you do?
Oh, okay. I was looking at Pat and involvement with the men's only bar up on the top of the Harrow on the Hill.
Right.
I was involved in the National Abortion Campaign and one of the founder members. So that had gone on for years. I'm actually quite sure when. I think in the 1990s I was less involved in that. I was active in Greenham Common during that time, taking a minivan, driving with Sue Coomber actually, minivan. Pat, did you come? Minivan to Greenham Common, taking food and clothing to the women, and involved in some of the surrounding the perimeter and blockading the gates, etc. And I was also very God, it's trying to remember all these things actually. As I get older. Glad Claudius so much. Claudius remembered all these things about voice. And I think because I'd left, well, during the, no, I think I'd left the house service by then because I was doing my degree. So I wasn't active anymore in the trade union movement locally, but I had been in the, around the hospital, Norfolk Park Hospital. And I also had just returned. I'd done my degree, a 4-year degree in course, and in 1 year I'd gone to work as a nurse in a refugee camp in Gaza Strip, and that's where I met a lot of Palestinian women groups who were also very active and often, shared similar ideas to us women in the West, if you like. And then I think
I remember when you came to the Women's Centre and you started the pregnancy testing.
Yes, because I think that was part of, you know, being involved in the National Abortion Campaign and thinking it's very important that women could have access to pregnancy testing. So we set up that's right, yeah, that was very good. And I think in that time, there was also, it was actually, we'd been trying to campaign for local NHS abortion services at Northwick Park Hospital, but it was the Brent women, I remember, who finally got, I think, a setup with the Pregnancy Advisory Service to actually enable local women to go and have NHS abortions through that. So that was something that we managed to do. Yeah, that's what I can do.
And did all these things get into the Voice magazine? Did you write articles and things like that?
I think there was something around, yeah, there were some articles, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, I think the Women's Conference, the International Women's Day conferences that were organised or raised lots of all these issues, because we had speakers, local speakers, national speakers, some international speakers at these local women's conferences, which were really, really well attended. They were very good.
Yes. Oh, good. Well, it's a shame. I feel it's a shame that I missed out on this because I just moved out of Harrow for a few years. So I was away for all this. Yeah. Okay. Have anybody else got anything to add to what Sue's been saying about campaigns? Pat?
Yeah, as far as the King's Head campaign or the Men Only Bill, that was actually in the mid-70s. And I was here as a student at that time, and I won't go into that because I don't think it really was featured in Voice, but it kind of led me into women's politics quite a lot there, because I'd ordered a drink there and was told I couldn't be served because I was a woman, and a bunch of us decided to try and opposed the renewal of the pub's license, but of course it didn't work. But anyway, I think the main thing is that I was involved in during the Voice time was certainly going to Greenham. I know I remember going with Sue and with the other Sue, taking stuff down there and circling the base. I think that might be before the Voice period of time. Another campaign I was involved in personally was the campaign to try and reopen the Well Women clinics that had been closed as a means of saving money by the local health authority, and we had a petition which was very successful across Harrow, and we got publicity in the local paper. We got to know a local journalist and phoned her from time to time to get stuff in the paper and sent press releases, and we arranged for we asked if Claire Rayner wouldn't mind signing that petition publicly at our stall in the middle of Harrow. She wasn't too keen to sign it publicly, but was happy for us to come to the house and for us to bring journalists along and photographers from the different local papers. So there are actually cuttings of that in our exhibition.
In our exhibition? That's good.
Yeah, with me and Anne, whose name I can't, no, Mary Nolan, sorry, Mary Nolan.
Right.
And yeah, we were in, the Well Women Clinic campaign really was part of Harrow Health Emergency that I was involved in separately from Voice. And it involved men and women, actually. It was a mixed group of people.
Yeah.
Then I was a member of the Labour Party, and a lot of the other things I did were connected with the Labour Party. I remember going to a meeting held by the Labour Party to look at what should be included in the Ministry for Women. I went with another member of Voice called Jill Woodrow, and after the 1987 election, which Labour lost, we faced cuts in health service, in education and all the rest of it, privatisation. I wrote an article called Post-Election Blues. And then I remember in 1989 when I actually left the Labour Party because I was unhappy about Kinnock's policy on changing from a unilateral disarmament to multilateral disarmament. That was my reason for leaving. I attended a meeting at North London Poly on Women for Socialism at the same kind of time as I left the Labour Party. And I think another Voice member came to that, and I wrote an article about that too.
Right. So am I right in thinking that most of the people that were involved in Voice were sort of left of centre?
100%.
Yeah.
Somewhat, yes. Okay.
I think, as somebody said at the beginning, some people were more interested in the arts and than in campaigning, but everybody was left of centre.
Yes, yes, because it was the time of Margaret Thatcher,
and feminist, I think, and feminist.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because we were an explicitly feminist group, so.
Yeah.
And Voice actually held a meeting during that I think it must have been the 1987 campaign for women, inviting the candidates to talk about what they would do for women. And of course, the Tory candidate didn't turn up, but we had the
Hudites.
Yeah, Hudites. And we had the Labour, and we had I think we had the Liberal person as well, giving their view on what they would do for women. So that was Voice.
But all the candidates were men.
Yeah. What did you say?
Candidates were men back then. So times have changed a little bit. Times have changed a little bit. So tell me about the cabarets. How did the cabarets start then? Was that just to raise money?
Yeah, well, like Lynn and I mentioned, some of us were more interested in, well, not more, but, you know, our passions were for theatre and cabaret and so on and so forth. And it was that whole era of alternative left comedy happening. And I remember it was all in Islington, of course, and Camden. And, you know, I used to take Time Out or City Lit listings and go through them really religiously. And because we had kids, it wasn't exactly that easy to get out. And I used to be so annoyed there were all these stand-up comedians happening, you know, so, you know, why not in Harrow? And Sue De Silva was really keen on that idea too. And then there was, and Lynn was, but, you know, so there's a small group of us. We thought, what the hell, why not Harrow? And we just tried it because we'd had Spare Tyre come as a fundraising. They did a one-off show. It was in Victoria Hall, which is, you know, next to that church in Central Harrow.
It was.
And I think the hall was packed, and we you know, we raised a lot of money. I mean, we were selling drinks and refreshments, and there was such a lovely vibe. People going, wow, the Spare Tyre have come to Harrow, fantastic, more of this. That we thought, well, why not float the idea of a cabaret? So we had it in that lovely railway hotel, which I still feel so nostalgic about having pulled down. And just in case people are watching this history interview after we completed, it was the place where the Who had performed, and I think the Rolling Stones even did an early gig there. So it was a very historic pub. There ought to be a blue plaque somewhere on the building there. And we had, I'll just look at the chronology.
So that was the place on the bridge in Wealdstone?
Yeah.
It was an old, a very typical London, one of those big red brick pubs.
Right.
It had lots of different rooms,
Right.
and a basement.
And it was actually very much an Irish pub, because there still was quite a large Irish community living in Wealdstone then. I guess they probably came with the railways and all that. But anyway, it was still a really lovely barn-like pub, which had a fantastic performance space downstairs. Do you remember the wooden floor? Because I think, again, because of the Irish community, they would have had huge amounts of barn dances, ceilidhs, Irish music. I mean, at the time we started booking that space, I suppose it was its gradual decline. But I do remember it was so funny, because there'd be the hardcore old men Irish drinkers upstairs in the public bar, and when us lot all turned up to get the venue ready, you know, we had to go downstairs, but to get the venue ready for that night's cabaret, they'd all look round, you know, which one's the Leslie then? I reckon it was that one, you know, it was that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just so funny. I mean, they're very amiable, but it did definitely reflect 1980s attitude.
Right.
I've got the chronology. So the very first Cabaret, we got Sensible Footwear to open the first night of Voices Women's Cabaret. That was on November the 17th. And then in December, we did it once a month, basically. We were delighted to have Donna McPhail, who was an up-and-coming comedian. And I've tried to track her down, but she seems to have, you know, disappeared. Really hard to find her. And Sandra Kerr, a folk singer who lived in Kingsbury, left-wing folk singer. And we tried to do the format. I mean, it also reflected money, but that we didn't have that much money available. We had to cover costs. But so the first half was, you know, the non-professional amateur, anybody locally wants to have a go. And the second half was the professional act. Does anybody else want to comment?
Yes, Pat first.
This is really not relevant for the time of The Voice, but actually very recently Jo Brand chaired an edition of Have I Got News for You, and quoted a joke that she remembered Donna McPhail making. Jo Brand was one of
I've not heard of Donna McPhail.
Yeah, she'd actually turned. Donna McPhail actually chaired it, didn't she? Chaired the cabarets at times, or compared it.
You compared it, yeah. And Lynn did too.
I compared quite a lot.
Yeah.
All right, so you can tell a good joke as well, can you?
No, I was quite straight, really.
You said this is a workshop.
I have my flip chart. Yes. The thing that I remember very vividly is that the first one we did was incredibly successful. So the pub, neither we nor the pub were really ready for it, and it was absolutely packed. And the pub must have taken a lot of money. And you know, they had to sort of bring more people down and more barrels,
right,
or whatever they were doing. And I don't think that was the very first draft, but it was very early on. I think we were all surprised at how successful it was, and there just seemed to be a need. And it was it women only? I don't remember there being any men in the audience. Yes,
it was women only. I mean, talk about shooting your potential commercial profits in the foot. Women only acts, women only audience, and you know, cut out half the population. But I think we felt it was important, although, you know, people did debate about it. Sorry, go on.
It obviously was successful.
I seem to remember Nick, my ex-husband, being there at the time. So I think there were men there.
No, we did special events that had mixed audiences.
Okay.
I have the list.
Okay. John Hegley was one of the wasn't he? So that was a special one.
Special events that when men were allowed.
One,
Yes. Okay. Well, that sounds like it was very good, and obviously you must have helped the other people, the Jo Brand and Jenny Eclair as well in their early days. So, Sue.
Oh, just going to ask, if I remembered, we performed as well, didn't we? Dress, and there were a couple of women who were involved with the cabaret, and they did a funny turns, didn't they? And I mean, we also dressed up in one session, I think. And
I think Sue De Silva was quite keen on performance. I think she set up things from time to time. I don't know how regular it was, but she was a sort of a main force behind our performances, I think.
Yes, she was very involved. The two of us used to work together to do the bookings, and she did the artwork for the posters. I mean, I did contact Sue De Silva, but for various reasons she hasn't been able to come today. But you know, she's definitely been acknowledged as a powerful
one of the founding members. Was she one of the founding members?
Yes, of Voice as well. She was one of the contributed to the look of Voice magazine. I think she did the logo. Yes. And as I said, the posters for the little flyers for the cabaret. And I remember I tried one Christmas and wrote a little kind of thing on. I dressed up as Mother Christmas. and I was comparing and had a few jokes. Boy, did they go flat.
Maybe
I
not
realised
well on
I
that.
had to work really hard to be a successful stand-up.
Yeah.
That was the end of my aspirations.
Right. Pat, you were going to say something?
I think Sue De Silva, as far as this is my vague memory, I remember doing some performance poetry at the time as well.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
you know, really talented poet as well as artist.
Yeah.
And did this? How did this fit in with the magazine and your campaigning?
Remember?
It was about having fun.
Yeah.
It was about having fun.
Yeah.
So this was the less serious side of it. Right.
Thank you for reminding us. It was about having fun. But again, when I look at my notes, because we got funding in 1988, we started the cabarets in 1987. And in 1988, a friend told me that the GLA, Greater London Arts Association, would provide a grant which covered losses, which actually was a great help. But you have to write the document to send, the funding document, which I'd got, it wasn't a huge thing, but it was very much again that we regarded these cabarets as a platform for notices and announcements of more serious things that we're going to be doing, because I remember saying, let's just bring a pin board, and on that we can give out leaflets and flyers. So it's very much, both fun but integrally part of our overall activities. Yeah.
Kay, you were going to say something?
Yes, just to follow on with what Claudia was saying, really, and to answer your question, Marilyn, about the involvement in the campaigning. Perhaps because of the performers who were booked, it was very not deliberately, but organically integrated with the campaigns. Because I remember Sandra Carr very well, and she's just a lovely, fantastic folk singer. And one of her most famous songs is something called The Maintenance Engineer. And if people don't know The Maintenance Engineer, it's absolutely worth finding it online, which is all about relationships of power with women, with employers, trade unions, and in a marriage. And it's a very funny, very clever song. And Jo Brand is another one, of course. You only have to look at Jo Brand's comedy now to see how very strongly she identifies with certain political points of view and feminism and so on. So although it may not have been planned that way, I think actually the cabaret did feed into the whole mission of voice, and maybe hopefully converted people who wouldn't have been involved in some of the other things that were going on, who wouldn't have been necessarily campaigning, but enjoyed the shows and maybe thought a bit more about it. And I do remember we occasionally had men there. I can't remember how it was organised, but I just love the idea. It's a bit like a reverse of the Masons, isn't it? Where you have ladies' nights. We had male nights. Just by special invitation, but very limited. So yeah.
Okay. And Lynn?
I was going to say, again, my memory is very vague and I'm not sure how accurate it is, but the impression I had was that we actually attracted quite a lot of lesbian women, and I think it was at a time when there weren't many venues or many places that lesbian women could go comfortably. And I think that was another attraction.
Yes. Oh yes, it definitely would have been in the 1980s. Yeah. Things were very different then, weren't they? Pat?
And I think it filled a bit of a vacuum in Harrow as well, because there was so little alternative comedy or, things for like-minded people, women and men, to go to. It still is a little bit, but it's a lot better with the Arts Centre. But at the time, I think there was very little going on really in Harrow.
Oh yes, yeah.
I think that gap.
It's always nice to go to something live, isn't it?
Yeah.
To go to the live cabarets, yes. But the magazine carried on throughout, and it was every month you managed to do it.
It wasn't every month. It was like 4 times a year, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, 4 times a year. So the cabaret was every month, but the magazine was only quarterly.
Oh, yeah. Well, sometimes every 2 months. It just depended.
Yeah.
When we hadn't amassed enough material, there was a special issue coming up.
Okay.
But yeah, it was concurrent with the cabarets, because the last cabaret was February the 5th 1989, Donna McPhail and Julie McNamara, who was a political folk singer. And so it folded again, you know, I think we were all exhausted. It was just such a lot to sustain. So the newsletter and the cabaret.
Yes, every month it's a lot of work, obviously, yes. And I also wanted to ask you about the International Women's Day events that you did. Where did you do those?
Well, we did them at Greenhill, and Sue Spilling was, you know, absolute. Partner and indispensable in putting together the programs, wasn't it, Sue? We spent quite a lot of time discussing programs and things, although with groups as well. We'll talk about this in a bit more detail. But again, the chronology, I'd forgotten the chronology. And the first Voice Women in Harrow event was in 1989. So I think we'd started preparing for it. Probably I'd had a meeting in the house. Again, I've got all the minutes. I was looking through it. I've kept them probably in the September or the October. And we had it in the March of 1989. And we continued till 1991. So we only did 3, again, just as Voice. But they happened as the magazine folded. And then we went on these other 3 years.
Oh, right.
Yes.
So you were involved in that very heavily.
Yeah, I think it was also that during that time that we made contact with the Asian women's groups active in Harrow, and then we started to join up with them, didn't we?
Yes.
And start to have, you know, their input, sort of thing, what they wanted to. We had, I think we tried to get speakers on from the various different campaigns that were going on concerning women. And I don't know whether or not, because there were 7 demands of the women's movement. I don't know, Claudia can remember this. Did we raise, were those some of those issues we raised in terms of workshops, etc.?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I've got some just summary notes. So we liaised with organisations like Women's Aid, Rape Crisis, UK Asian Women's Conference. I mean, we, you know, again, looking at the minutes, it was quite impressed again at how systematic, considering we just volunteers doing this, but how systematically we approached this and liaised with all these organisations, and was so so conscious of trying to show diversity. And we put the event was intended to celebrate the idea of an International Women's Day, discuss issues affecting women both in Britain and internationally, and last but not least, to meet, share ideas and have fun. Day was organised with a full workshop programme, and groups were invited, which they did, to sell food, and they could make money for their own organisation. And I remember the food, that first one was smashing, and the college agreed to provide a creche, 1 creche worker, and we had to have a rota of volunteers. And I put the day was a great success. We had all the organisations were offered a free stall, could publicise their group's activities. There were titles like Growing Old Disgracefully, We're Not All Blonde and Busty, ones on motherhood, which Kay can talk about, power and powerlessness. We had 11 discussion topics with specific workshops for Black women, Asian women and Irish women, and other topics covered health issues, work and sexuality. And for that first event, 150 women attended that day. And I've got the feedback forms and I've got the programs for everything. So when I look back, I was bloody impressed. 10 out of 10, 5 stars on TripAdvisor. So when this current movement of feminists say, oh, intersectionality, it was all just up themselves, white middle class, second wave feminists with no interest, you know, but themselves. It was like, no, we've got the proof. Well, at least in Harrow, we're working bloody hard to make links. One could always do better, but we were intent on that, Sue, weren't we, right from the start?
I'm very impressed, Claudia, that you've got all these notes and minutes.
Well, I had to dig them out.
Absolutely brilliant, because that,
yes,
reminds me, because I've forgotten all these things.
Yes, okay. To finish, I think really, I just wanted to ask, How do you feel about it now, looking back? I mean, you're very impressed with what you did, Claudia, obviously. I mean, I'm very impressed with what you managed to accomplish. But looking back and knowing what the state of things are today, have you got any comments anybody would like to make? Pat.
You're on mute, Pat.
Someone is about to knock at my door. I'm going to have to go off the radar for a little while.
Okay. All right. Okay. Lynn, what do you think about looking back?
I mean, like Claudia, I'm actually deeply impressed. And being older, I just wonder where we got the energy from. I mean, you have so much more energy when you're younger, and that sort of enthusiasm and commitment. And when you were talking, I was thinking about whether or not we could carry that forward into issues around global warming and that whether we could do it again, if you like, but yes, from a slightly different perspective. And I'm glad to have been involved and to have known these wonderful women. Yeah, I think it was a good thing. I don't think there's anything negative about it, really.
No, that's good. Sue, do you want to say anything?
Oh, I don't know. I just think those days, I mean, I wouldn't have been without them. They're who I am now, and involved with loads of women thinking the same way, sharing value, campaigning, all those skills. I mean, now I'm now involved in environmental movements, so those skills that we learnt then are still important for today. But you know, we're still fighting for a lot of those things we were campaigning for then, and it's really good to see young women much more perhaps confident, etc. But I still think we've perhaps gone a bit more forward, but we haven't, you know, won everything. The battle still goes on.
Yeah, we still have to continue. It's a good fight. Okay, Kay, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, it was interesting what Claudia said about intersectionality, because she mentioned also the motherhood group at the first International Women's Day, and the buzz on that first conference was unbelievable. I can remember it now. But the motherhood group that I attended, that has informed a lot of my later life. You know, some of the women who attended, we started to have a consciousness raising group, and a lot of the people in that group are still my friends now. But one of the things that stands out about that group, that it was, we had different speakers throughout the session, and I think there was one English woman, an Asian woman, and a Nigerian woman, all talking about the different ways they approach parenthood and how it had affected their lives, and opening a discussion on it. And looking back at the time, I just still took that for granted. I don't think intersectionality was a term that was in wide use, if it existed at all. Just took it for granted. Yeah, I think it's a new thing, isn't it? But look, it isn't a new thing. But looking back now, I just, I mean, you know, people like Sue and Claudia and Lynn did much more work for Voice than I did, because of my own, the fact that I was working full time, plus having young kids. But I mean, the motherhood, that conference, for instance, they had a creche. For God's sake, they had a creche. I was still feeding my youngest child. He was about 3 months old, and I could take him along, stick him in the creche, go to all these amazing events, come back and, you know, sort him out, and then go back to the thing. And that was all sort of pretty unheard of at that time, to have that facility. So that was fantastic. But also, I think that the energy and the attitudes that were there at that time are incredibly valuable. You know, I think people like Claudia and Lynn and Sue and other people who couldn't be in this room right now should really be patting themselves on the back, because it was a time of excitement for feminism anyway. And this, you know, to use a football term, it brought feminism home. It brought feminism into Harrow at a public level that it really hadn't been before. So I think the people who are most involved in setting up and working for it should be proud.
Yes, so do I. It sounds like it was a fantastic movement, you know, and you can't keep that level of commitment going forever. So you did very well to manage what you did. Okay, Claudia?
Oh, sorry, Lynn, did you summarise?
No.
Did you get? Oh,
yeah, I've spoken. Yeah.
Lynn, you go first, and then I'll.
No, I've spoken. You go.
Oh, right, okay. I mean, thank you. That was very nice to hear. And but I mean, let's not big this up too much. I mean, it was only like 150 women, you know, that would ever attend, and probably the cabaret is the 75. So I am thinking if this was today, of course, we didn't have the power of social media, of Facebook, of retweeting and stuff like that. Because I thought it was very interesting when Pippa joined our group for our Women in Harrow History group project. She said, funny, I was living in Pinner at the time you were doing this stuff. And I mean, I suppose we did have press releases in the local paper. We did, because I wrote them all. I got them all.
Well, that was when we had the Harrow Observer.
But she said, I didn't know about it. I never knew about this. And, you know, so I suppose looking back then and now, you think, wow, if we were doing this now with the power of social media, you know, and multiply our presence, you know, thousands of fold.
It would be even more difficult to control, I think. I think you
probably
did very well at the time.
Yeah, but I suppose the other thing that's interesting is what happened. I mean, we were part of the zeitgeist, so you know, this was the seminal book. We got this in the exhibition, and that inspired us, didn't it? Because it was all the London boroughs listing what was available for women. So I mean, that was what was driving us with the energy, and you know, this was coming out. So it was a whole time we were just, you know, we weren't that revolutionary. We were tapping into what was the lovely feminist GLA, Ken Livingstone zeitgeist of that time about women's projects and getting funding. So what was I?
So that was when the GLA was funding these.
Yeah, and then that went, and that probably all coincided with our. I know. The other point was what happened was, though, there was a lot of money going into local authorities, and a lot of the things we were doing voluntary wise got professionalized. It became a local authority job to have women's, and the women's officer from the local authority might, you know, help organise. I'm not saying that happened in Harrow, but once you get that, it takes all the revolutionary spirit out of something, doesn't it? And I think there's a whole generation of young women, perhaps until up to now, who were expecting professionals to come in and help organise the groups for them. But of course now there's all this energy around with environmental and you know, the Me Too movement. So maybe it's coming full circle again. I don't know. Anybody got more comments on that, Sue? You were going to make a point.
I think Pat needs to.
All right, sorry.
I was thinking that around the a sort of campaign that Voice, I think, would get involved in is around misogyny in the police and other public bodies. Yeah. And I don't know whether you've mentioned that while I've been sitting. And I've actually been reading about Mina Smallman, who's the mother of those two women who were killed in Wembley. And Nina Smallman, one of the women who was killed, was actually a Labour Party member in Harrow. And she was the first Church of England woman archdeacon from a black and ethnic minority. Nina Smallman, the mother of these two women. And she has spoken about how the police response to their daughters going missing was absolutely inadequate and absolutely not happy about there being offered an apology without having acknowledged what changes they need to make as well. They didn't take the responsibility. And I think as Voice, we would have perhaps had a meeting with Nina Smallman addressing the meeting. We certainly would have, and I think we would have got a meeting of women together to talk about misogyny and issues in the police and others, particularly as during the Labour Party conference, there was a discussion about forming something called Friends of the Police, you know, just at that time when Sarah Everard's killer was being sentenced. So all that sort of thing, I think, might have come up under the auspices of Voice in
Yes.
the 2020.
So we need a new campaign, and we need some new young women to come forward and start doing this all over again.
Yes, a new generation. And actually, when you go, I've been 4 times to that exhibition now, and there's lots of comments in the visitors book saying this is inspired. That, you know, this does inspire other women in the future. It's interesting to read some of those comments.
Oh, good.
There aren't that many of them, but
Right.
there are a lot of them are children who've written sort of.
Well, we'll all go back and have another look then.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll close the discussion now, but thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for
Thank you for
organising
sharing
it,
it.
Marilyn and Kay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Right. Now.